I'm delighted to be joined again today by Caroline Gourlay of Caroline Gourlay Business Psychology. In our last episode, if you joined us, you will have seen that we discussed owner-managed businesses and family businesses and how decisions are made within those businesses, and more importantly, how we can avert disagreements or manage disagreements. In this episode of the series, we will be talking about change within the owner-managed business or family business, and how the business owners and operators can manage that change, whether that's unexpected change or planned change, or external factors driving change. And so, Caroline, welcome again.
Thank you.
And please, Caroline, tell me a little bit about your experience of working with family businesses and change and the impact that can have.
Well, I've tended to get involved with planned change in family businesses, particularly succession planning. That's the big one that people tend to think about. My very first experience with a family business was preparing the son and daughter of the founder of a business to take over, and I started that 5 years before they took over. So it was a long. They were working in the business in a sort of middle management position, and it was a long leadership development process, and which carried on through that transition. For them to feel comfortable that they were stepping up, and Dad's still there as the chairman, and you don't shift the balance of power overnight. There's a transition, and so that was a very interesting and long experience. And of course, there are other planned changes that businesses go through. Any businesses go through where they decide to change direction, to have major infrastructure change, get a new IT system. Those kinds of things always need careful managing. And one of the things that I always find interesting with businesses is I think most people come up through one or other route in their work of either managing projects or managing operations. So I'm a project person. In my previous life, I used to be in IT, and everything was project based. Right. So everything's got a deadline. And I run my own business. I've had to really think about how to manage targets. Whereas lots of businesses that I work with are really good operational management. They know how to manage an operation, but they are less experienced at managing, a project. And so that bit where something comes in and it's an important strategic change, and it has deadlines and milestones and a project budget and a scope, it doesn't fit into their normal pattern of reporting. And sometimes people struggle with that idea that if you're at a senior level in a business, or you run your own business, you have to manage both projects and operations, targets and deadlines. And actually flipping between the two is another place that in my leadership coaching, that's a place that I often come in, is to get people to think about those kinds of issues. But I'm guessing with you might come in more around the unexpected change, the divorce, the death, the sudden illness, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, possibly colleagues do in different departments when disputes arise and so on. Like you, Caroline, I very much get involved with planned change, succession planning and exit. And we talked in the episode 2 regarding shareholders agreements and or partnership agreements being a route map or a roadmap, if you like, for the effective operation and running of a business. The beauty of I found with these documents, particularly when you're planning for succession, is you can also agree rules about change or potential change or risk of change. And with planned change, the sort of documents that we can work on with clients is to provide a framework, if you like, for decision making at that time of change. So do the parents want to step back? And if so, can they still have a role in the business, but possibly less involvement, changing the voting rights, if you like, attaching to the shares that they have, or their involvement in certain decisions, so that actually there is space and time for children to develop and step up and take over the reins, and do it in a structured way so that there can be a provision for founders or parents financially, whether that's dividend, capital rights, and so forth. Whereas the actual ownership and operation and management and decision-making, voting rights can be transferred over to the other generation or involved with outside support. We talked about in episode 1, non-executive directors from outside coming in. And again, that's that three circles family model coming together in one document, if you like, for how we can set the framework for that. So that we can allow off-ramping, if you like, stepping back gradually in that process. But there may also, less commonly with family businesses, but certainly wider owner-managed businesses, there is that preparation and building for succession and exit by way of a sale. Here there can be provisions within a document dealing with, well, what does that look like? What are the intentions? Is there the intention to sell in 3-5 years? Is it a growth journey and sell? And if so, what if there are, say, 5 directors? Do we want to have a situation where 5 shareholders? Do we have a situation where 4 shareholders can drag the 5th into a sale to a third party, so that there is no veto in place, for example, preventing that sale? So it's about decision making, getting the balance right. And that again is in that sort of shareholders agreement or document that I've talked about before. But also, yes, we can prepare businesses for that sort of unexpected situation where change is not expected, and dealing with and working very closely with colleagues in our private wealth teams, so that the business is linked to the family and estate management affairs, so that we have provisions dealing with, well, what does happen if someone dies or becomes incapacitated? What happens if there is bankruptcy of a shareholder or something like that? Because what you need to ensure is that the documents all speak to one another, so that the trust and estate planning for private wealth speaks to the business document, so that there is a flow and an understanding of what happens to that wealth and assets.
And as a psychologist, I mean, I'm kind of thinking how important that would be, because if something happens, especially if something happens suddenly, if someone suddenly died, there would be such shock in the system and such emotion in the system that having a clear route map that says, oh, and this is what happens now, we agreed that before, must make such a difference, because you're not in a place to make sensible decisions when you've had that kind of knocked sideways shock and you have all this other stuff to deal with. So the clarity must be very reassuring for people. It's not a situation that I've found myself in with a business. I know that there would be a lot of emotion swirling, which again, it's that overlay of you're running a business, but you may have lost a parent or a grandparent, and whilst it might be challenging at the outset to put these provisions in place, or it might feel that you're discussing things that you would rather not think about. If the unexpected does happen, it's incredibly important. It's so useful to have that in place for the family. And again, it's that coming back to decision making, stopping potential these core events or sort of earthquake events in the life cycle of a business, creating unnecessary damage or problems for the business in the way parties behave and act to one another, make decisions and work together. So it does again provide that route map for the most important periods. And moving on to external change and so on. I mean, obviously, Caroline, we're hopefully coming out of a pandemic here in May 2021 when we're speaking. What sort of things have you seen arising in businesses, change caused by external factors, in particular the pandemic? Well, this has been the biggest sort of sideways shock that any of us have faced, and everybody has needed to pivot and to think about, well, what does this mean for my business? And the most successful businesses have done that quickly. In family businesses, what I've been hearing is that it's a kind of generational thing where you have some owners. It's been older generation owners have thought, okay, well, this has been a wake-up call. This has made me realize life is finite. We what are we waiting for? This is the time I want to get out. And I'm hearing from, I don't know whether you found that there are a greater number of transactions or people talking to you about preparing for succession or even preparing for sale, but it's like, I've given my life to this business, it's enough. On the other hand, I've also heard the reverse. I've heard of businesses where owners had started to step back, founders had started to step back, the next generation was taking over and they've gone, no, this kind of a crisis, I'm taking the reins back. So that's been a difficult kind of, there's a sort of push-pull there. And then in the younger generation, there's an awful lot of organizations, their pivot strategy has been digital. We have to do something digital. And I am probably older generation myself. I'm not suggesting that we can't do digital stuff, but I know that younger people do it better than I do. And so there is a need for the younger generation to step up and step in to take over some of this digital stuff in which they are more at home. And if we think about that leadership model that I talked about in the first episode, one of the things that we talked about there was the idea that an important part of leadership is to know what you should be focusing on now and whether you're the right person to lead it. So it takes a mature person to do it, but it's very good leadership demonstration to say, what we need is a digital strategy. I can't do it. You're 25. Can you do it? And hand over the control to them. And then there's that really difficult bit of people in that next generation of stepping up and stepping into, we talked about one of the hallmarks of good leadership is being able to take those brave and difficult decisions when they're needed. And people usually have years to grow into taking these brave and difficult decisions. And one of the things that happens in family businesses that never happens in non-family businesses is you can find yourself in quite a senior position with people when you're quite young, you might be in your 20s, and there may be people working in the business who remember you as a child. And that, there are no situations really where that's normally going to happen. And when you're 23, 10 years ago is half your life almost, and it feels like a very long time. When you're my age, 10 years ago is quite recent. And it's a bit of a shock when you go, gosh, you've grown, haven't you? That thing that when you're a child, you think, God, why do people keep going on about how I've grown? But you get to my age, you kind of go, oh, yeah, I understand now. That time passes much more quickly when you get older. And so suddenly realizing that this kid is now your boss and this kid's going to furlough you or make you redundant, that's a big ask of someone in their 20s. And I think that there will have been some quite tricky situations for people to manage, particularly if they live in small communities and that they're an employer in their area, and then they may be taking people back and they may not take everybody. This isn't a situation that I have personal experience of, but I was at a family business conference where they were talking about this kind of thing. And I can envisage that might be a real challenge of leadership very early in someone's career, quite a defining sort of moment of, okay, I realize what responsibility is. And
of fire in some ways
it can be. If it might be worth bringing the model back for a moment, just to kind of round this up if we're thinking about external change.
This will round it up perfectly. Thanks.
Yeah. So those of you who watched the first episode of this might recall this leadership model that I use, which looks at the 8 tasks of leadership, the 7 of which fall into these domains of leadership and the coping with pressure. And people have had to cope with a lot of pressure over the last year. And one of the things I said is a lot of psychologists focus on different things. I focus on leadership and a lot focus on resilience. Even as a leadership coach, helping people with their resilience has been a big part of what I've done this year, because this has been a test for all of us.
Imagine.
But the point about this model is looking at, well, what is it that leaders do? And they set direction in that strategic domain, they plan and organize and then deliver results. And they do that with people. So they create alignment, build relationships, work in teams. And then in that bit in the center where you stand back and say, where should we put our effort and attention now? If we think about change coming from the outside, very often the place to be looking is in that setting strategic direction. What does this mean for our direction? Does it, do we have to pivot to a digital strategy? Do we get out of this area completely? I was talking to a business yesterday in a completely unrelated situation, who are the kind of go-betweens between Chinese manufacturers and UK businesses. And they had they had some business with direct-to-consumer digital businesses, and they had some wholesale business. And the wholesale business, which was all for the retail industry, just fell off a cliff last year. So their strategy has had to be, right, well, we've got to build more of these relationships with people who sell directly online. So that kind of how do we pivot quickly? And I mean, even more creative things are the gin manufacturers who moved into making hand sanitizer, that sort of thing. But it may not be that. If there's external change, and the first thing to look at is this affecting our results? Are we suddenly hemorrhaging cash? Then actually there's something that needs to be done in that space. How do we immediately cut our costs? Where do we get money in from? You start looking at that bit of it. If you've just lost a major relationship, if the external change is our biggest customer's gone bust, you need to be going out and building you'd look at the strategic bit of where are we looking to build, but you would be looking to build relationships quickly with other customers. So there's a whole kind of thing here around, well, where do we put our effort and attention? And when there is external change, you can kind of quickly go around that model and kind of go, okay, well, are things okay here? Are we all aligned? Do we know where we're going? Or are our systems okay? Or is that where is actually that in order to make this happen, we would need a new website, or we would need to change our operating model or something. Is the team configured properly for this change? So this can give you a framework to think about, what do we do here? How do we, where should we put our attention? Because you don't want to fall into the trap that I mentioned in the first episode of putting your attention on the bit that you like or the bit that you're good at. You want to be putting your attention on the bit that the organization needs. And if that bit is, I need to work on me to increase my resilience, then that might be a big part of it as well. Because if you're about to keel over because you're working 20 hours a day, then actually one of the places you need to put your attention is, how do I get some time out and recuperate, because you're no use to the business in a heap in the corner.
It's a useful framework, isn't it, Caroline? It's something that you can apply at different stages. Everywhere. Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I can see the parallels with financial advice, legal advice, psychological advice, commercial advice, throughout all of these factors that play out in needing to cope with change and develop the business and avoid possibly becoming extinct as a business if there is dramatic external change, and you're unable to adapt quickly enough.
That, as I say, my focus is on leadership, and that's what leadership is about. It's not standing there and telling people what to do. Leadership is about focusing the business in the right directions and creating the conditions for other people to succeed. That's what good leadership's about. That feels like a note to end on.
I think it does. Can I thank you very much, Caroline, for your participation in this series of episodes regarding owner-managed and family businesses.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Likewise, been a pleasure to have you, and look forward to working with you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.